Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we have two very special guests who are absolutely leading lights. It's me and Craig, because today it marks a very special occasion. This is our 200th episode. Craig, can you believe this is our 200th episode?
I can't believe that we've been doing this that long. I still remember before we started all this, how there was a large part of time where we discussed doing it before we actually even sat down and did it. And we're like, oh, we should do a podcast. Oh yeah, we should. And we never got around to it. And then we finally did. And then we haven't stopped.
I know. And I mean, I think it's remarkable. Touch wood, by the time we publish this, we have never missed an episode either.
Right. And we started right back at the end of 2021. And here we are, 2026 is around the corner.
Yeah, I think that's
crazy.
Bonkers. So we thought we would just chat amongst ourselves instead of having a special guest to mark this occasion. But what are we going to talk about?
Well, listen, I think that the main thing that people come here to listen to and to hear about is the writing and publishing industry and what's happening and what's hot, what's not, what works, what doesn't. But the industry has been changing around us, right? Since we started back in 2021, let's say 2022, since really that's realistically where it was. Things have changed a lot, and we've talked about it a lot in with the guests that have come on, people that are experts or at least have some experience in whatever it is that has changed. I mean, when we started doing this, Amazon's, when we're selling on Amazon, first of all, is still the biggest, right? The biggest place to sell books. But what has really risen up, let's say, in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, is that direct sales model where people are trying to sell away from Amazon. We've always had Wide for the Win, right? Erin, she's been on a number of times to talk about going wide, and authors have been doing that long since before we started this podcast. But this idea of selling directly to your audience is something that has really only started getting big in the last couple of years, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's going to get bigger. It's my obsession at the moment, because it's a game for me, as somebody who really, I want to make money from my catalog of books. And it's a game changer in that way, because you are no longer beholden to Amazon. You have control over who sees your books. You get to keep all of the information about them. You get your money in a question of hours or days, as opposed to 60 days after month's end, which just allows you to do things at scale. That being said, it is an awful lot more work. And I think it's one of those things where anybody can publish a book on Amazon and, sell a few copies or something like that. But not everybody has the technical expertise or the finances or the motivation to create a sales funnel that involves like Shopify and WordPress and Book Funnel and link them all together and then do Facebook advertising at scale. So I think it separates, and obviously ironic to say this, since 70% of women 70% of authors are women, but it separates the men from the boys, so to speak, or it separates the women from the girls. It separates the
adults from the children.
Yes, the dogs from the pups, whatever.
And I mean, speaking of which, we had Lauren Carter Riley on, who not only was she sort of talking a lot about this kind of idea of selling outside of Amazon, but I think she wasn't even using Amazon at all. She's selling her books. I don't even think she was publishing them on Amazon, right?
That she bypassed Amazon completely.
Episode 175 she was on, and she spoke a lot about that. And to do that, you really have to be willing to embrace sort of the social aspect of building a community. You can't just live in a box and not sort of build your audience base without, if you're selling on Amazon, you can totally, if you wanted to, and I wouldn't recommend it, you can ignore your audience in the sense that you could just funnel money into ads and hopefully, you'll make sales and grow your community that way. But it's a much more lasting way to do it by reaching out to them. And some authors do it through, Facebook groups or, through their newsletter. But you can do it through all sorts of social. TikTok. I know, Lauren was, I think, big on TikTok, right? And she had tons of followers on there, and that allowed book talk being. That's another thing that's come out in the last couple of years. This whole idea of book talk. It's like kingmaker, and people that are doing that are really showing that there are other ways to grow as an author other than just Amazon alone.
Absolutely. And a lot of it is, using yourself as collateral. And it's funny, I've said a lot of times in a lot of blog posts and things, one of the biggest tools that you have as an author to sell your books is you, because there are like 4 reasons why people buy books. And one of them is they have a relationship with the author. And somebody like Lauren, who has a huge following on TikTok and is very successful at the skits and the little dramatic things she does, she has a relationship with all of these people who love what she does, and then she has a product that she can offer for sale. And in some ways that's the new model for successful publishing. It's difficult for people like you and I who wrote under a pen name, and obviously we can't like promote ourselves as this pen name, and that kind of undercuts us, I think. So yeah, writing books under your own name and using yourself as leverage is one of the most powerful ways you can be a successful self-published author these days.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to a number of authors about different ways to connect to your audience, and the importance of, back in episode 178, we had Clay Vermeulen. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. On the episode, and we talked about the importance of writing communities, and we had Peter Moore on episode 189 talking about Substack, which is another thing that is becoming more. I'm hearing about it more and more. I know Substack's been around for a while, but like authors using it to really connect to their audience and to build that relationship with their audience outside of Amazon, outside of all the sort of brick and mortar or electronic stores that are the traditional places where you think of when you say, okay, I'm going to be an author and sell my books. Those are the places, and when we were writing, those are the places. That's the only places we ever lived, right? But now we're opening it up to so many other things to bring in your audience, which I think is great.
Yeah, and it's the thing that we always used to worry about, even back in the day, was when you're going to write a book that might get you kicked off Amazon.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, it didn't even need to be particularly like controversial, and so you can't get cancelled when you own your own funnel. Right.
And that's a good point. I forgot about those days. And we heard about, I think we had an author on, actually, I remember we had booked an author, but I don't know if she ever showed up, who had a big issue with Amazon. She had gotten kicked off Amazon. And, we've heard about these stories, and unfortunately it's one of those things where, people are almost afraid to talk poorly about them because, they might take retribution on what they're writing and stuff. So, but, when you don't have to rely so much on one store, you don't have to worry so much about that one store changing the rules or all of a sudden having an issue with you or your writing, and then you lose your entire livelihood.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the thing. And it was, it used to be like the people who wrote the ridiculous stuff, like, the babysitter left at home with the German Shepherd or something, which you could be like, okay, I can understand why that book gets thrown off Amazon. But then it got to the point where it's like there were authors having troubles. They were writing science fiction novels about vaccines, and it had nothing to do with COVID or something. But because of the political atmosphere at that time, their book suddenly became invisible because COVID was a bad word in the search algorithm. So yeah, I think a lot of people have really had their fingers burnt by Amazon and then want to take it their own way. But that depends what you want to do with your career as an author.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting too, because even though Amazon has, vested interest in bringing in, well, they have their own Amazon ads and all that stuff, right? But lately we've been hearing about like this A10 algorithm, which isn't necessarily new, but I think that what they're doing lately is tweaking it. We're hearing more and more about authors saying that they're seeing a drop in sales, even though nothing else has changed. And a lot of the fingers are being pointed towards the new algorithm, which supposedly, this algorithm is sort of what controls what comes up when people type something into the Amazon search bar, right? So, if you type in some keywords, what comes up is often based on, it used to be more based on how many sales those books have made. Now it's being based on other things. And one of the biggest factors they're saying is how many new people outside of the Amazon algorithm or Amazon ecosystem you're bringing in to Amazon. So just sales alone, especially if you're just like pummeling money into Amazon ads, those ads are really just taking existing Amazon customers and putting them towards your book. And that might get you onto those top lists. But when it comes to searching and the algorithm that controls what people see, and maybe, the also bots and all that stuff, they're saying that those are being controlled more by this new algorithm that is favoring the idea that you're bringing new people in that aren't necessarily Amazon customers. They're coming from your website, from your social feeds, from Facebook ads, from all these different places. And that is actually counting more almost than pure sales. And that's an interesting change.
Which is funny when you think of some of the other podcasts we've had with like Asprey and Ariel talking about bad publicists or bad publishing partners. One of the things that you have with self-publishing is you have to do your own marketing and you have to bring customers to your books. Whereas a lot of independent publishers and small publishers and hybrid publishers have the same thing. They're like, hey, we'll publish your book for you, but you have to do all the work marketing it. And then it's a case of it's like, if I'm going to have to do the work of marketing my book anyway, why do you get to take a share of the money that gets made from it? And the fact that Amazon, it used to be Amazon, now Amazon is expecting you to do that, to bring customers to them. And that's one of the things that has always frustrated me. So I used to advertise on my books on Facebook and send people to my product pages. And Amazon has now put so many adverts for other people's books. It was like, why am I spending money on Facebook ads to send people to my product page where they immediately go off and buy other things by other authors because Amazon has so much publishing on the product page? And it's a closed loop when I'm sending people to my own website, because then it's a case of like, they go to my website and they click off, that's fine, but they're not going to go and buy someone else's product.
Yeah. And I think people are finally starting to sort of see the light in terms of that. And, like you said, a lot of those publishing companies, and you had mentioned the Ariel, who had that really bad experience. And the hybrid, there's these hybrid publishers, and some of them are good, but some of them are sort of also just really trying to capitalize on, self-published authors who really don't know enough of what they're doing and what is right and what isn't. We hear stories about people paying all this money, and then really what are they getting in return from that, right? So maybe they'll do some editing, maybe they'll get your cover design, but you can do that on your own. You don't need somebody to take a big portion of your sales to do that. Although, we do hear sometimes about good ones. Like Asprey was really happy. I mean, he came on to talk about a bad experience he had with a publicist, but his publisher, his hybrid publisher, he was happy with what they were doing. So there are good ones out there too, but you almost sort of wonder who is looking out for the little guy. Nobody these days, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're looking out for yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, and you have to do your research. You have to, if you look at that episode, so the one with Ariel, that was episode 179. Give a listen to that. See what a bad publisher did to not just her, but everybody who was working from them. And then they went bankrupt, and then that was the crazy part of that story. Is the company went bankrupt, and then one of the former owners bought the bankrupt assets basically for pennies on the dollar, and then started a new publishing company, basically the same person running it, but getting out from under all the debt that they created by running it very poorly and dishonestly. And then people, I guess, still sort of worked with them, and then they went out of business again.
Yeah, and it's horrible.
What a surprise.
That's something that you and I have. I mean, we got together because I think we share the same vision of when we take money from authors, we want to feel like we are providing them value. And the problem is there has always been in self-publishing, even before self-publishing existed, back in the old days of traditional publishing, there were these so-called vanity presses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And, you know, there's always just been these predatory people who see people have a dream of wanting to be a published author, and they're like, well, I can go and milk them for everything they want, I can get out of them. And that's just sad.
Yeah, and those things still exist. Like I see commercials on the rare times that I'm watching shows that actually have commercials that I can't skip. Once in a while, I'll see something come up about like, have you written a book? Well, this our publishing house will publish it for you, and blah 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 blah. And you could tell by what they're saying, they're a vanity press. They're basically going to get you to spend tons of money and sell you with a bunch of books, and they're going to do nothing to help you sell them or move them. They're just going to take your money for publishing it, which you could do for free on your own. And we have lots and lots of episodes about how to do that. We have articles on the website on how to do that. You don't need to spend all this money, thousands of dollars, hiring somebody to do that for you, because in most cases it's not going to work out, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Real publishers are not asking you to put up front money, right? They're taking your book, and they're often taking a risk by trying to sell it for you, but that's why they take such a big percentage. And you know, if somebody's saying, okay, well, I will, you know, take your book, but you pay for all that, and I'm going to take a percentage. Well, no, that's.
I think that was the thing. One of the cachets that still exists is people are like, oh, if I get my book traditionally published, it's like I'm a quote unquote real author because I got chosen by a gatekeeper. And I think that's part of the thing, that people can be predatory by making themselves seem like legitimate publishers. But, you know, when the money should come, the publisher should get the money out of selling your book rather than getting money out of you publishing your book with them.
Right. And even the traditional publishers, we're hearing more and more about how people get traditional published contracts, but then they still are on the hook for promoting themselves, you know, whereas those companies used to do a lot of that for you, but now it sounds like they put the onus of that back on the author.
Which is, and then what is the point of having them? But I mean, that's Asprey was a publicist who spoke with, because that's the other thing. There are people, as you said, who you've got your book published, and then they swoop in and like, give us your money, and we'll give you these esoteric, not clearly defined things in return. And people have that dream and that passion and that belief that their book is there, and they get exploited for it.
Yeah, and then we had, you know, so Asprey talked about, I think, a bad PR experience, but before that we had Tarina Bell on in episode 193, and she's a publicist, and she actually is one of the better ones that actually helps the author get the exposure they need. And that's the thing that authors really have to understand is, you know, when we started, it was so much easier to sell your books as a self-publishing author. There was so much less competition out there that it wasn't as hard to stand out. Now, if you're an unknown and you publish a book, there's pretty much zero chance that your book is going to sell any copies without you doing any sort of promotion, without you doing any sort of advertising or marketing, because nobody will see it. You know, even if you count on the Amazon algorithm of, you know, new releases and whatever, there's a million other new releases that week. It's still going to get buried, right, without sales. So you have to figure out how to do that. And if you can't do that on your own, you can hire publicists. We had, you know, a few years ago, we had Mickey Mickelson on, but again, more recently, we had Tarina Bell on, and they can tell you some of the things that a publicist does to help you get noticed. And a lot of times they're thinking outside the box, and they're getting you into areas where, you know, you aren't, you know, it's not just, oh, we'll do this thing and this thing that is super, super obvious. They're thinking oh, let's put you into this thing that has nothing to do with, books, but it's putting you in front of people that are very interested in your topic, right? We'll put you on this podcast that talks about this other thing that isn't necessarily about books, but it's about what you're talking about. And then because of that, people then say, oh, and the benefit to that is you're not being put up against a bunch of other authors. You're being put in a situation where people will hear about your book, which is relevant to them, and your book alone, not your book and 20 other books that are similar to it. Absolutely. And it's hard to do that on your own, right? And that's where a good publicist comes in.
I mean, I remember back when you and I first started in this business, we were part of a Reddit group, and we always used to say a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think that's still the case in the self-publishing industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to be willing to, share information with each other and learn from each other. And, that's what it's all about. But a lot of this stuff is cyclical. I mean, when you and I started, it was all about the short stories, right? We were writing the short stories. That was king. Then novels became king and short stories fell completely away. But if you look recently, Amazon's added new categories like 90-minute reads or 2-hour reads or whatever it is. And basically those are sort of categories of short stories that you can browse for quicker fixes of writing. And they're almost sort of making an attempt to bring those, short stories, novellas, novelettes back into the fold of being something that people will buy, which makes sense, right? Because we're in that sort of like generation where it's hard to keep people's attentions, the TikToks and the quick YouTube videos and this and that, right?
Are you just making the most perfect segue into the topic
trying.
Of we had our friend Terence on for a podcast episode, and he just had a book published by Veritas, which is a small independent publisher, and it was a short book. It was a tiny book. I think I actually have it within arm's reach if I lean up. But that's one of the things, is short fiction the new thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just last week we spoke with sorry, his name is now 2 weeks ago, actually, Chris. We spoke with Chris about writing short stories, and in the past we've spoken about that as well. But we got away from it for a while, and I think it's coming back, which is great, right? The problem is with the short stories, though, and I don't know that this is a problem that is fixed by Amazon simply adding new categories, is what do authors do with those short stories and how do they sell them, right? Because when you look at those, when I looked at it last time, I even saw some top names in there. I think I saw Freedom McFadden had a short story that was in the top 5, I think. But even hers, all of them were 99 cents. If you're a huge name like Freedom McFadden, you're probably selling gobs and gobs of copies of your short story without really probably doing any sort of advertising, or at least the advertising from your full books are incidentally selling your short stories. But for somebody who, if that's all you're doing, you're this new author and you're gonna write short stories, how do you promote them without breaking the bank? Because if you're selling it at 99 cents on Amazon, you're making 35 cents, something like that. So how do you really make a living doing that? You can't advertise and make a profit on that.
Well, I mean, that's where we were talking with Terence about physical books. Maybe physical books are having a comeback, and one of the things you can do with direct sales is you can sell your physical book, and that means you can get it at a reasonable price that gets printed on demand and gets sent to your person, and you can get a reasonable return on it, which is difficult to do with Amazon.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is, though, I guess Terence's was what, a novella, I think, right?
Yeah, hang on, I'm going to reach up and grab it.
Yeah, but if you're talking about like short stories and things that are 5,000 or 7,500 words, printing those off as a even using Amazon's on demand, print on demand, I don't think you can be profitable really selling a 5,000 word book with KDP Publishing.
No, I mean, that's it. It's like, I think it's a different model, where you're like, okay, I'm going to sell a physical book, and part of the appeal of what I'm doing is selling a physical book, and it's pocket size, so you can sit it in your pocket, and you can read it, and it doesn't take that long, like the old James Bond books used to be, these small things. But that's a completely different sales model. And then it's like,
yeah,
I think we spoke about, if you are churning one of these out a month or something, you've got 12 written, you could be like, hey, sign up and you'll get sent a book a month. And then you're talking, that's something that financially has some legs to it. But it's
yeah, and that's where you have to think outside the box. I think that's one of the good ways to do it is, if you have a bunch of those, maybe have a subscription model, or maybe we talked about using them as lead magnets or free giveaways. But to make that work, you need other books to sell to them, right? Is your lead magnet has to be leading them to something. And if it's just leading them to another 99-cent book, I mean, unless you're able to sell through all those books to them. But when you write that first one, that second one, that third one, it's going to take a while before you can reach profitability. You really have to have a good long-term plan. I mean, eventually you can pull them together into a collection. But it's not that easy to sell collections if you're an unknown either, right? People have to still take that chance on you. But at least then you could do the advertising, and it makes more sense because you can sell that collection as a full price book, and the profit margin isn't so minuscule that it takes away the any value from it.
Absolutely. Because I think at the end of the day, the advantage of self-publishing still exists. There's that guy, Nick Stevenson, who wrote that, you need 10,000 readers. If you have 10,000 readers and you continue to write books, you can make a 6-figure income from being a self-published author. It's just becoming more and more difficult to, it's become different to how you can get those 10,000 readers.
Yeah. But listen, everybody's got different ways to do it, and we've heard some interesting ones. I remember, we spoke to, what was her name? She wrote a book. She was writing a book a week, which
yes.
So that one, I'm just looking it up here. But that was Alison McBain back on episode 174. And so she was trying to write a book a week, every week for a year. And I mean, I don't think she made it. I think she got something like 35 books in or something like that, right? But still, I mean, that was an impressive feat. And again, like going into it, a lot of times, here's some behind the scenes, stuff for anybody interested in how we typically do these podcasts is, I don't like to sort of get too much information up front or come up with a bunch of questions. I like the format of just having a conversation and sort of like, making it organic and discovering it, as we go. So I knew ahead of time that she wrote a book a week, but I didn't know much about that. So once we got into it and I realized, okay, well, she did a lot of pre-planning, right? She did,
yeah.
I was like, oh, how are you even coming out? Like, every week it's like, okay, now I'll start on the next one. Okay, what am I going to write about? Like, it wasn't that. I mean, she definitely, decided what she's going to write and every week, and she had it planned out. But then the actual writing of the book, putting it all together, and then of course she left the editing and putting it all together separate as well, right? But the actual writing of a book every week, and then after the year, then you say, okay, now you take book one, get it edited and whatever. And so she was starting that process. But still, it's an impressive thing, and authors are trying different things, and that I think that's one of the things that will make an author successful, is being able to try something different and have it work out, get them away from what everyone else is doing, right? You got to stand out somehow.
And the problem with experimentation is sometimes it goes wrong. We had one of my favorite guests, Raymond Benson, who writes James Bond books. He wrote a new official James Bond book about Felix Leiter. And the people behind that, Ian Fleming Publications, they had this great idea, and I've got a lot of respect for them from trying it, which was buy the book and we'll give it to you in installments. So you buy the book and you get the first installment, and then it'll auto update with the second installment. But the problem was the auto update didn't work. Ooh. And it was so janky that you would actually have to email Amazon to get them to send you the full book. So it was a complete disaster. But that was experimentation. And I mean, and it's a pity because Roman Benson is a fantastic author. It was a really, really good book. And I know a lot of people who still haven't been able to get the full book, but experimentation is one of the things. Unfortunately, he's the kind of, you know, he's a professional writer. He's been writing as his sole income since the 80s. So he was willing to take that one on the chin, I guess. But that's
yeah. And you know what's interesting about that is you know, that's another thing that's sort of come and gone in the time that I think we've been doing this podcast, is that idea of episodic writing and you know, publishing little bits and pieces of your book. And of course that has been done informally for a long time, where, you know, people have written, you know, on their Substacks or on Wattpad or whatever, you know, they publish a chapter or a book, or not a full book, like a chapter every week or every few weeks. And then, you know, people will follow them and maybe they'll make some money off Patreon to do that, right? And then the issue is always like, what happens if you get invested in it and then the author disappears and it's not right. Yep. But then we saw the rise of things like Radish and Vellum, or Vella, Kindle Vella, that where they tried to make a business out of that, where they tried to say, okay, here, you know, let's get a bunch of people who are willing to buy credits, and those credits can be used to buy episodes or installments or whatever they call them of your book. And, you know, so they broke the books into bite-sized chunks. And I did my own experiment with that a few years back, where I took some of my old books and I put them on Radish, and those books still kept earning money. Like, I mean, I did it, and when the experiment was over, I kind of just left it, and I was still getting regular payments from it. Not huge amounts of money, but it was money. But then both of those, I mean, Vella came after Radish. It was sort of like a copy of them, and they folded. They went under, you know, and that was backed by Amazon. They couldn't make it work. And then in the last few months, Radish also, they announced that they were shutting their doors and closing up shop. So people are having trouble making that sort of episodic model work, even though it's been done for free on places like Wattpad for so long. But trying to turn it into a business model doesn't seem to be working.
And Wattpad is huge. That's made kings. I was thinking, who was it? Sarah J. Maas, who wrote the A Crown of Rose and Thorns.
Right.
Akatar. There we go. She started on Wattpad, and that's how she got her publishing deal. It was interesting. I revealed to you in our previous podcast that we recorded that the first short story I ever got paid for was in Penthouse magazine. But Playboy used to serialize books. They serialized the James Bond books, and every week you'd read every month, I guess, you'd read a new chapter. And so, you know, it is an old model, but isn't it funny how it spectacularly failed? Yeah,
and actually, so yes, you did reveal that. And at the time you said Hustler. So was it Hustler or was it Penthouse?
Oh, no, you're right. It was Hustler that I wrote for. Yes. Sorry, Penthouse makes it sound more legitimate than it was.
But listen, any kind of writing that they're paying you for is legitimate. I know that Playboy had, they were the sort of the big name where you heard about, like, really, really well-known authors used to write stories for them. But and they weren't necessarily erotica stories. They were just short stories. They would publish their short stories in Playboy. I think with Hustler and Penthouse had their forum, or, you know, like, it was always like, I can't believe this happened to me. But that's a different kind of story than what they were publishing, I think, in Playboy. But they were still hiring authors to write them, and that model, I think, is also kind of dead. You know, we spoke when we were speaking with Chris about short stories. He was telling us, you know, it's not that easy to sell the short stories. We used to have a lot of magazines, a lot of contests, and they're still out there, but there's a lot less of them now than there used to be for short stories. A lot more competition to getting your short stories written. And if you're making a living writing short stories and relying on winning contests or getting one of the few spots in magazines, it's tough. You know, it's very tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we had spoken to somebody else about, I think it was about writing, specifically about what was it? It was how contests. It was writing. It was about entering contests and what those things would do for you. Not just about your about the money that you would get from winning a contest, because it's not always that you would even make money from it, but what it could do for your career. And that was also really interesting, because it sort of like, it was one of those things where I never really thought about doing those myself. Book awards, that was what it was. Renee Garrison, and she that was back in episode 158. She was talking about how and why you should submit your books for awards, and that was really interesting as well, right? So not just short stories, but your books, because those things get you more publicity. They put your name out there for more people to see, and anytime your name gets out there, it's another entry point to you as an author. If somebody's Googling you and your books are only available on Amazon, they're only gonna, that one thing will come up. But if you've won awards from here and you won this contest over there, like all those websites that promote those things will now also pull up your name, and you're going to become more renowned, and people will be able to find you easier, and it just helps to your discoverability.
And I think that's one of the things about writing. I mean, at the end of the day, we have seen so many different trends, but it does seem to be the case of you have to write a book and get it out there to as many people as you can. And then you have to write another book and get it out there to as many people as you can. And then and if you continue doing that thankless task, eventually you'll get to the point where it's like, oh, look, actually, I'm making some money from these books. And then you can really leverage it into, I think anybody has the potential to be a successful self-published author. You just have to learn the craft of writing and follow the process for successful self-publishing. And the problem is the process changes and chops, but really what comes down to it is writing good books and being able to put them in front of people.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked a lot about writing craft as well on this podcast.
Yeah.
We've had, everything from, learning how to research your books, especially when you're writing like historical novels, or you're writing, a lot of times fantasy or sci-fi. You think, oh, well, it's not always historical research, and sci-fi is like, oh, I'm making up what's happening, but you still need the research to make it plausible, right? If you want sci-fi to be one of the things that differentiates sci-fi and fantasy is like sci-fi is supposed to be more realistic, more plausible. It's not magic, it's science. But and sure, you can say, well, this thing exists, but if it's like almost basically magic, then it's almost fantasy, right? So you have to be able to give it some sort of background in science, even if it's some science that hasn't yet been sort of nailed down, right? So a lot of times that requires research. So we've talked a lot about that. We've talked a lot about writing hooks and cliffhangers. We've talked a lot about, visual storytelling, about writing nonfiction, the differences between, writing for sort of like more of a business audience or an audience that is looking for facts and stuff versus somebody who's looking for, fiction. We've talked about heroes and villains and anti-heroes. We talked about how to refresh an old title, right? Taking that was with Terrence. That was why he came on originally, was like talking about how he was gonna. This is second. I think it was his second appearance on the show, right? Weren't we talking about how he was taking an older book and sort of renewing it again, right? These are all things that, as a writer in this day and age, you have to know how to do. Otherwise, you said it before, right? You could be the best marketer or the best advertiser in the world, but you still need a product that sells. And if you can't write a good story with compelling characters and all that stuff, then you're not going to be able to make it.
No, and we're coming up to the top of the hour, but it reminds me of someone else who I wrote a blog post about. I don't think he's been on the podcast, but an Australian author, Greg Holman, who wrote kind of like a fictionalized autobiography. But in that, he mentioned how he was a very successful businessman and how you run a successful business. And at the end of the day, we as self-published authors are running a business, and the three ingredients for a good business are process, leverage, and execution. And the process is the process of writing a book, because if you can write a book consistently, you've got that. The distribution is how you sell it, whether it's on Amazon, whether you're doing direct sales. But what is that thing called leverage? And that thing called leverage is why people want to buy your book. And there you have to have either a book with a really good hook, or you have to have a pre-established relationship with your audience, or you have to have won an award, or you have to have your advertising really down pat, or ideally a combination of those things. But it is, at the end of the day, a business, and the process of being able to just put something out that is marketable is the foundation stone.
Yeah. And listen, that's at the end of the day, that's what we're here to help people with. And hopefully by watching these episodes, hearing from peers, from people that are in the same boat as you, that are learning or that are experts in something, they'll teach you something. We have our free blog. We have a whole whack of services on our author services page where we can help you with things. If you need, you can schedule one-on-one discussions with us. But at the end of the day, you still got to write the book, and you as a self-publisher, you've still got to market it. Even if you're hiring out people to do it, you're still in charge of that. You're still making all those decisions. And the only way to know what the right decisions are to learn, or the best way at least, is to learn from those that have done it before, and not just from their successes, but from their failures as well. And hopefully that will keep you from making as many of your own missteps along the way.
Right. Well, I guess now we are coming up to the top of the hour. We ought to wrap things up. Normally, this is where we ask our guests to say where they can find us and stuff like that. But if you're listening to this, you've already found us. But maybe it's worth pointing out that, hey, if you are a self-published author and you want to be successful at what you do, come and check out our website and check out our list of author services, because we have a bunch of services that might help you, from cover design and blurb writing and one-to-one consulting about marketing and getting beta readers and all sorts of things that we offer as services. And we spoke about all of the people who are out there selling snake oil, willing to take your money, not give anything to return. But I would say the one thing that defines what Hidden Gems does is we always try and provide value for money with whatever it is. So if you're an author and you pay us for a service, we really like to think that when we give you whatever it is that you got from us, you will be satisfied with the product, and you'll feel that you got your money's worth. And hopefully we want you to succeed. As we said earlier, a rising tide lifts all ships.
Absolutely. So it's been great. 200 episodes, and let's go for the next 200.
Yeah, that's gonna be crazy. We're gonna have like one for every day of the year soon. So yeah, well, if you have enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a comment down below. We really appreciate hearing it or reading it. And hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with a guest for the 201st episode of Fully Booked. So until then, cheerio.